that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello. I'm currently in my new apartment, which by the time you're watching this, I'll have been in for months, but right now it's pretty empty. But setup will be different eventually. For now, different space again. Today, I have for you Wide SarGasso Sea by Jean Rice. Now, Reese, right? This book is essentially fan fiction. It takes place, it's a prequel to Jane Eyre, but of course was written much later. What this book does really well is being a more realistic depiction of this time period in terms of a lot of post-colonial sentiments. Racism was brought up in Jane Eyre. It was so minor and so minuscule that I didn't even mention it in my review, but it is there as kind of like a little bit of forward thinking on Charlotte Bronte's part. Not a ton, but it's in there. But this book does a much better job representing that. And just by and large, it creates a much more realistic depiction of a lot of things. For instance, the main thrust of this story, beyond all that extra stuff because this takes place, Jane Eyre as well, but particularly this story takes place after, the 1700s when slavery was ended. But it's in that in-between period, of course, racial prejudice, all those problems go on forever, even to this day. But particularly then it was this weird time where slaves are now free. They are not slaves anymore. But a lot of people, and this is a little bit of research I did. Okay, I'm no expert. Other people have done a better job of this. But, some people would basically do biblical slavery after the immoral slavery, which even the slavery in the Bible is debatable. But basically, what is somebody to do after spending their entire life as a slave? And the slave owners were compensated for the loss of money because they had to free all the slaves, so all that income, all that money disappeared. So the government paid them, but did not pay a single dime to the freed slaves. So what do? So a lot of them would basically make a deal with their former slave owner, if I'm understanding it, where they would get room and board, and they would be fed and paid to continue to work, I guess, kind of. But anyway, we're following Antoinette, or as she's known in Jane Eyre, Bertha, and she lived in Jamaica in the West Indies, which is cool. I'm a big fan of, Pirates of the Caribbean and Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag. So the West Indies and everything, it's very, I have that image in my mind because of those media, big pirate locations, I guess. But because a lot of times you do historical stuff, you have to you read the descriptions, you kind of get it, but if you didn't live then, you don't really. But I can envision it because Assassin's Creed in particular has always been good about historical accuracy. With although there was the whole thing about them adding a church that wasn't actually in the church, that wasn't actually there at the time that the game took place. But anyway, it's a whole other tangent. But anyway, I like that setting, and it's cool to see a serious, realistic tone here to that setting. Another thing too is this book is very short. I wouldn't say it's dense, but there's a lot packed into this tiny package. Jane Eyre is much longer, but there's no bloat. Like, if you feel like Jane Eyre drags it all, you won't feel that with this book because it's straight and to the point, every which way, shape, and form. It's succinct. As for the prose, some people really love it, some people not so much. This is definitely more of like a Hemingway McCarthy, where it's a lot more subtle, relies a lot more on subtext that you read through it. That being said, as a spiritual successor, as a prequel to a beloved classic, to go from that romantic, flowery prose to this sort of direct and to the point prose is a bit jarring and made me not appreciate it as much as maybe I would have if I had read this in the vacuum. But so we follow Antoinette, says Bertha. She lived, she did not own slaves, but she was amongst people who had been former slaves growing up. And somebody said this in a review of Jane Eyre that I watched after I'd done my review, because they're far more perceptive. It was a lady, so of course, more so perceptive than I am, this dumb guy over here. But she said in her review, which I found fascinating and made me really think about it when I thought back about Jane Eyre. But the lady, and maybe if I remember, because I watched quite a few YouTube videos, if I remember the one that said it, I'll put a link in the description of her video. Even though she's got way more subscribers than me, it's not like she needs my help. But she said she thought that Bertha was a mirror to Jane Eyre. Like how Jane, as an adult, she kind of holds back a lot of her temper. It comes out in spurts, but she's kind of like, she's the ego, the self in check. Whereas Bertha's like all those moments of rage and indignity and anger that Jane Eyre feels, but released through. And I didn't really catch that on the read through, but thinking about it, it does make sense. But if you didn't catch it in Jane Eyre, there's no way you will miss it in Why SarGasso See, because what Jean does is perfectly parallel Jane's childhood perfectly. Jane grew up in a rich society. However, she was mistreated at every turn because she was not wanted. Okay? Then later on, she goes to a school, and at the school she's mistreated until she's not. But so she has a rough upbringing, right? She's this fiery, righteous young lady that hates injustice and likes to speak her mind, but at every turn is in trouble about it. Bertha, Antoinette, is in a similar position, but far, 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 far worse. She isn't really a part of those, sort of plantation owner sort of white people society. But because of people with the same skin color as her, understandably so, but nonetheless not right either. Many former slaves are very negative toward her and her family because they're white. And because, well, the whites enslaved us for a long, long time. So they'll call her like the white devil, or a white N-word is another one used, I think, by some white people. I forget. But so you have a lot of that going on, and there's a lot of physical abuse. And early on, beautifully to mirror Jane Eyre and foreshadow. And I'm not spoiling like the whole book for you. Like even telling you plot points. I mean, it's really experiencing it that will really do it for you. But near the end of the beginning part, where we're following Antoinette such Bertha as a child, her house burns down. And seeing as how Jane Eyre ends, it's quite interesting. The second part of the book follows Rochester, Edward. I think a lot of people read this book and make Edward out to be a complete and utter villain with no redeeming qualities. because a lot of people already have that assumption about him from the novel, so they easily translate that into Jean's work, who definitely does not position him in a very favorable light. But I do think it leaves room here for still interpretation. This definitely makes him more human. He's a complicated fellow. But it is clear that whether or not he liked her or was just infatuated with her at the beginning, he quickly realized she was not the one, and kind of neglected her. Got into a marriage that he probably shouldn't have, and then she started going crazy, which in large part might have done to do with him. I don't think it'd be solely put on him. He did put her in a room with no windows for years, which probably is going to seriously mess with your mind. But again, even what we get here, I don't feel like he was vindictive, or he did it specifically because he hated her. But I get it, it's messed up, and I don't even want to defend Rochester, because to be honest, it's quite, in that situation, what do you really do? I guess you just let her out, you let her run around, but she tried to hurt herself. She talked about hurting herself. She talked about hurting others. What do you do? I don't think leaving her in an attic was the right thing, but what's the alternative, I guess? Do we leave her in a mental asylum where they're historically been mistreated horribly, maybe even worse than how she was in the book? I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe somebody in the comment section can let me know what they think. In part 3, we go back to Antoinette, and it's sort of this mental deterioration as we head toward the Jane Eyre timeline of the book. Like I said, definitely sort of a rewriting of the events, and I think there's a lot of mastery here. I think there's a lot of superb writing, superb plotting, so everything about it is stellar. I guess intrinsically in my heart, no matter if it's public domain or not, when you're playing in somebody else's sandbox, I personally feel, I'll have to hold this, that you should keep intrinsically the spirit of the text within it. So same thing with Star Wars, right? Many people have written and directed and done stuff for Star Wars that's not George Lucas. It could be better than George Lucas. I don't care. But it must stay within the spirit of, and there's a wide range of that. I know that kind of sounds vague. It can be vastly like Andor. I've never watched it, but people often claim that that's the best piece of Star Wars media ever. But it's a lot more serious of a work, way more serious than the films themselves are, which are, pulpy. But as long as the core themes and values are still there, then it's okay. Jean Rice kind of makes this a version, kind of makes a reimagining of the events to make a more realistic circumstance. And certainly I appreciate, because the Jane Eyre novel most definitely just kind of just waves away Bertha / Antoinette and makes her whole suffering just kind of an afterthought. Oh, well, she was crazy. Oh, she was this. So she deserves it. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, but it does ultimately come down to, no matter the problems with Edward Rochester, him and Jane are meant to be together, and that lady was crazy, so she ultimately deserves it. And I definitely think that's wrong, and I appreciate this book for giving her voice perspective, absolutely. And I appreciate all the other things about it too. It made me have to dive in a little bit more into history to see some of this, of course everybody knows about, the 1700s and the American Revolution, and a lot of stuff about, the 1800s and, what eventually become the early 1900s with, Martin Luther King and stuff. But there's a good, large swath of time in between where, unless you're really studying it, you're not going to know what's going on there. So it was a nice little history lesson for me. It's something I didn't have to learn in school to know what was going on with that. And I like Antoinette a lot here. I think Rochester, maybe it's just because I'm a man, I don't know, I certainly hope I'd be a better person than he is, but I read a lot of books, and I really, man, woman, I really try to live in other people's shoes. I mean, that's the whole point of literature, is to make you be empathetic. And like, I feel horrible for Antoinette. Like, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I wouldn't want that for myself. She was dealt a shitty hand. But I've also been in Rochester's shoes, or in terms of like, I've read his perspective, and I don't see him as this pure evil monster. Very flawed, hypocritical man, but not a monster. And I think a lot of people oversimplify that, and that's okay, but I just think the world's filled with a bit more nuance than that. Not to say that this book isn't filled to the brim with nuance, it is. I'm just saying, I think it provides a special nuance to Antoinette, and Rochester's kind of there, and kind of definitely framing him in a worse light. But all that to say, I don't think this story necessarily inherits the same spirit or thematic tone that Jane Eyre does. So it is a little dry. Like if you wanted to read this before Jane Eyre, you definitely could, but you're going to have a total whiplash when you get to Jane Eyre, and it feels completely different. I mean, it'll definitely give you a new perspective going into it when you see what's going on with Bertha and feel terrible for her. But it's a very different clash in tone, and you know, that's really up to you and how you're going to feel, and how you're going to feel about that. But I did enjoy it. Would I recommend it if you like Jane Eyre? I know I love Jane Eyre. Honestly, I've been making, you know, Harold Bloom has like his whole Western literary canon. I'm just making Alex's literary canon, just writing down all the books that I think are absolutely essential that I've enjoyed, which is based on merit, based on like objective good, but also my personal preference. So I have Jane Eyre on there as like a book, like as a must read before you die. Personally, from my personal Alex canon, you know, before I pass away, or at least something behind that no one will read or care about, but for my own 2 cents. I don't know if I would put Wide SarGasso Sea on there. I understand why people would. I don't know if I would. But also, my history is not really aligned with that. So I also understand, you know, other people might feel that that's a vastly more important work and touch their hearts more deeply and more personally than it's going to affect mine. And it's fine. I do think it's a masterpiece. I do think this was a beautifully constructed narrative. I have issue with inserting yourself into someone else's work and fundamentally reshaping it to fit a more realistic tone, to give voices to those who weren't heard. When I get that, but at the same time, yes, Jane Eyre's it's a very romanticism gothic tale that, you know, brushes over a lot of things, right? I get that, but there's also like a beauty in that tone throughout the story. It doesn't make it right, doesn't make it realistic, but it makes it feel like Jane Eyre. It can't not, another book's not going to feel like that because it's not Charlotte's book. And I don't know, I really like Charlotte's writing. I really like the tone she brings to the entire book. I don't know. There's something about it I love, and something intrinsically within the corner most of my being gets upset about the fact that was altered and changed to tell this story, which maybe it did need to be told, but it just upsets me when people play in other people's sandboxes, and it just gets all cynical, I guess. I mean, I don't think this book is inherently cynical, but it's a darker, realistic tone to a more hopeful atmosphere that Jane Eyre brings. I don't know if I'm making sense. But do I recommend it? Absolutely. Make up your own mind about it. But no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's a masterpiece. Just don't know if it's a masterpiece for me. Does that make sense? Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. We'll have a better setup in the future, eventually. Till then, live long and prosper. And next time, There's going to be several videos because there's no way I'm doing it in one. We have a very famous piece of Spanish literature, which I've been dying to read for a long time, but I'm going to finally set it down and put it down to paper and talk to you about it, which is Don Quixote by Cervantes. So, very much looking forward to that. I will see you when we discuss that next time. Bye-bye.